Palace gates stood frozen as headlines flashed across every screen. In hushed tones, the unthinkable spread through the crowd. The title is gone. A decision so sudden it felt like history stumbled in real time. Phones buzzed, breath held, the nation stunned by a choice that cut through tradition and power alike. And as disbelief rippled outward, one question hung in the air. What forced the king to act today now? Royal titles are not just ceremonial crowns. They are promises of character, symbols that tell the world who deserves respect and trust. When one falls, the echo reaches far beyond palace walls. This isn't gossip whispered in tabloids. It's a reckoning for the soul of the monarchy itself. Tradition demands loyalty, but justice demands courage, and today those forces collide in full view of the nation. What happens here could redefine royalty for a new generation watching closely, deciding what they will believe in next. Because behind closed palace doors, pressure had been building for years, and no one knew once hailed as a prince of privilege and power. Andrew now stands as a cautionary figure in a different light. Years of whispered controversies turned into public reckonings, and the distance between royalty and reality suddenly felt smaller. Patterns emerged that people could no longer ignore. Protection where there should have been accountability, silence where there should have been answers. Across cities and screens, frustration grew into something sharper, a sense that trust had been traded for comfort at the top. For many watching, he no longer represented heritage or honor, but the danger of unchecked entitlement shielded by tradition. Yet even as disgrace followed his name, the story refused to end there. Because what came next was not retreat, but resistance that would challenge everything and reshape the crown. The king never sought this moment, yet history placed it squarely on his shoulders. Between blood and duty, he stood at a crossroads few ever face, knowing that every choice would echo through generations. Loyalty pulled him one way, responsibility another, and the weight of the crown pressed heavier than any ceremony ever could. In quiet halls, he wrestled with the cost of protecting family versus protecting faith in the institution he serves. This was not the posture of power, but the burden of conscience, where courage means choosing the harder path when the easier one tempts most. For those watching beyond palace walls, his struggle mirrored a universal truth. Leadership is not about comfort, but about conviction. In that silence, he sensed the future watching, measuring not his words, but the courage behind his choice today. And when the final decision landed on his desk, the room went silent. The tension outside the palace swelled into a roar as cameras camped at the gates, and headlines sharpened their tone. Across oceans, commentators weighed in, and with every broadcast the pressure intensified. Advisors whispered hard truths behind closed doors, warning that silence now could cost the monarchy its future. The storm was no longer distant. It rattled windows, flooded corridors, and demanded a response that tradition alone could not deliver. On one side stood those clinging to ceremony and precedent, insisting time would quiet the noise. On the other rose voices calling for accountability, refusing to accept power without responsibility. The divide grew sharper by the hour, until momentum itself seemed unstoppable. Then came the moment no one could stop. The room seemed to hold its breath as officials gathered, eyes fixed on a single statement waiting to be read. Seconds stretched like hours before the words finally landed. The title is stripped. A ripple of gasps moved through the hall, followed by a silence so complete it felt deliberate. Outside, screens lit up in unison, headlines racing ahead of comprehension. This was not a moment of vengeance, but of resolve, the king choosing principle over protection. In that choice, authority found its truest voice. There was no cruelty in the verdict, only gravity, the quiet acknowledgement that actions carry consequences even in gilded corridors. For Andrew, it was not a spectacle, but a reckoning, the long shadow of decisions finally meeting the light of accountability. History seemed to pause, then take a step forward. Viewers across continents felt the shift, sensing they were witnessing more than a royal update. They were watching an institution redefine itself in real time, trading comfort for credibility. And as the palace absorbed the shock, another arena was already igniting beyond its walls, where millions prepared to react. Within minutes, timelines would flood with voices ready to argue, celebrate, and challenge history together worldwide. Social media exploded almost instantly. Hashtags climbed the charts, trending across continents, as millions shared disbelief, outrage, and cautious celebration. Some hailed the decision as a triumph of accountability, a sign that even the highest could be held to standard. Others mourned what they saw as the erosion of tradition, fearing a precedent that shook the very foundation of the monarchy. Live TV became a battleground, commentators shouting over one another, analysts dissecting every nuance, every pause, every look. Memes went viral, speeches were rewritten, think pieces multiplied, and timelines flooded with debate. It was more than news. It was a cultural earthquake, a shift in collective consciousness where power, principle, and public opinion collided. And in the middle of the noise, one question echoed louder than all. Could the crown survive this reckoning? This moment was never truly about titles or crowns. It was about truth, accountability, and the courage to act when the world watches. Power without responsibility collapses, yet dignity, even in silence, endures. The king's choice reminds us that institutions can still choose what is right over what is easy. That legacy is measured not by privilege protected, but by justice upheld. And that courage can reshape even the oldest of traditions. The royal shockwave of today reshaped tradition and reminded the world that accountability matters above all. History doesn't remember who was protected, it remembers who stood for justice. Share this story, reflect on the choices that define us, and stand for accountability in your own life, because courage always leaves a mark.